and welcome to another uplifting, inspirational, and educational segment of From Mess to Message, A Journey to Purpose. I'm your host, Winfield Sargent, and today we are talking with two awesome gentlemen, Mr. Antonio Bascom, the Executive Director of Jericho Road Inc., and Mr. Carl Joseph, the Program Director. Gentlemen, welcome to our show today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yes. Now, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I wanted to bring you gentlemen on so that we can actually have a discussion about domestic violence, what it is, and its effect in our communities and our families. So, Mr. Bascom, tell us a little bit about Jericho. I know you guys have been in existence for over 20 years. Tell us how Jericho Road Inc. actually started.
Okay, well, the basis of it is that me and my mother experienced domestic violence me being at a very young age. And because of that domestic violence incident, we have had problems. When my mother went through her domestic violence situation, there was no help. There was nobody understanding. There was nobody to talk to. I remember she went through stages where she picked up the phone and talked to the dial tone because there was no friends and no assistance there. And our friends didn't get involved, and nobody else seemed to want to talk about it. So it was just me and my mother alone. My mother began to start a support group very early, helping women who have experienced all sorts of domestic abuses in the home. And from there, we sprung into a project called Jericho Road Inc., where we help people that are experiencing the same things we did, not only to help, but not to experience the dial tone effect that we had.
Always to have an outlet, someone they can talk to.
Yes, sir.
Yes. And Mr. Joseph, as the program director, tell us about some of the programming at Jericho Road that that's helping heal our families and our communities.
Well, actually, Tony came up with this idea. We have a women's event every year around Mother's Day, where we pamper women who have suffered through domestic violence. And they come and women give their testimonies and give out information. And a lot of times, one of the events, I can recall one of the events, they brought their children. And one of the women in our organization came up, she gave her testimony. The children were so fascinated, they went to her and said, "Can you tell us your whole entire story?" Then the kids brought her to their mother to tell the mother about how she had to forgive because she hated the guy who abused her so much, she was taking out on her kids. And that was one of the most impactful things I saw. And then we also have different seminars on breaking the bonds of domestic violence, generational curses of domestic violence. And he's also our facilitator. He comes up with a lot of different educational topics when it comes to domestic violence. He came up with the idea for having an annual basketball tournament geared toward men. To engage them in domestic violence. And we do these educational seminars quite often in churches, in schools. We've done it in libraries. We've done it in salons. So different aspects of domestic violence that Tony comes up with.
And now, Tony, when your inspiration, when you sit down and you think about these workshops, now does all of that stems back from your experience as being involved in domestic violence, or do you look at the temperature of what's going on in our community at that time and what we need?
Okay, so in all fairness, it has to be a mixture. You have to see what the people need outside and see what is needed outside and how it affected you and how would you relate to them and how can they relate to you. It's no good having a project if only you can relate to it, right? So we have to make sure that whatever you pick has to be something that is the climate of the season. You understand? So what we find that is the climate of this season is self-love, right? And we find a lot of people don't love themselves. And because of that, not loving themselves. See, because you can only love as far as how much as you love yourself. Your love could either be limited or unlimited. And the first person that teaches you love is the primary caregivers that brought you into this world. They teach you, that's how we got our aspects into our relationships. That bond determines a lot of our future relationships and how we interact with others, right? And that self-love creates that unlimited love for the person that you're going to be with, or that fear that allows you to abuse somebody.
Now, I'm going to kind of, in which maybe I should have started this when I'm going to ask you, Mr. Joseph, to explain what domestic violence is. Because we have a lot of people who look at domestic violence as just someone beating them. And they always say, oh, I'm not a victim of domestic. I don't get beat. You just use some harsh words at me. So can I want to, and maybe both of you can chime in on this, differentiate the what domestic violence is and what it looks like.
Oh boy, it could be in so many different ways.
Yes.
It could be money.
Give us a few.
It could be financial.
Yes.
It could be just physical.
Okay, so when you look at the differentiate when domestic violence is anything that someone imposes their will on you, and it's unwanted abuse, right? That's just a generic thing. Okay, but when you look at domestic violence, it encompasses many different things. Of course, we had it encompass sexual, mental, verbal, economic, and physical violence, and we know those five there. But it also could destroy you spiritually, right? And spiritually that spiritual death is one of those deaths that nobody sees, but that you're going through all by yourself, right? And these are the things that domestic violence encompasses. So domestic violence could be abuse, the verbal abuse alone. Physical abuse can heal. That verbal abuse lasts with you a long time. You take it in, and it also dictates how you treat other people, and how you take what other people treat you. We just did a seminar on rejection, and people started to cry because we did the father loss. So the father loss program is like when your father rejects you, or you believe that your father rejects you. As young kids, we have that egotism, where we believe all the world is centered around us, and it has to be in order for us to survive as a young kid, because we need these certain love and we need certain things in order for us to grow and develop mentally. If we don't have those certain things, we become despondent, angry, and we develop emotional disorders. Okay, so now what we are looking at today is, because a young lady didn't have a father in her life, she believed that she wasn't worthy enough to have anybody in her life. And so when she got into a relationship, when she finally got into a relationship with her husband, she would hide, or she would not express herself in fear that he would not accept her. And what she ended up doing was exacerbating the relationship to the point where he became frustrated with her, because he didn't understand. He's doing everything to make her happy, but she's still not happy. But the problem is, it has nothing to do with him. It has all to do with her and how she feels about herself, right? So when you get down to the nitty-gritty, the problem was her father leaving at an early age, and she feeling unwanted, which she couldn't show what we call that authentic self. The authentic self is your true self. And so then we deal with another theme where we battle with imperfection and perfections. Whole nother story.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right? So the psychologist found to bring the father to talk to her. So he said, listen, it's not that I didn't want to be with you, and it had nothing to do about you. It's all about her and him and the mother's relationship. The mother had another boyfriend, and because she had another boyfriend, he didn't want to interfere in that life. So he figured the best thing for him to do was to leave her there and make them have a happy home with a new family, and him live somewhere else. But nobody explained that to her. Nobody told her why the father left. So she always thought that it was because of her.
Yeah. And I find that so much in our families, where the child internalized, because they don't know how to express what they feel. And the other thing too, when they do express how they feel, it's like they get kind of like, oh, be quiet or whatever. And I to me, from what I've seen, when a child internalizes and all they see is violence,
Yes.
then they go into the role of the abuser or the abused.
Right.
So let's talk about, Mr. Joseph, let's talk about that cycle.
Well, I can talk about it from my own personal experiences. With my father, came from the Caribbean, very angry. He wasn't physically abusive or anything, but very emotionally abusive. And I finally had to ask myself, why does he do this? Why does he act like this? And it was really funny. The revelation came through a cousin. We had a family wedding, and she came, and she said something to me. She said, when your father was little, we used to beg our father to take him home. And I said, why? She said, because your great-grandmother, was so emotionally abusive to him that she also drank. So he internalized all of that. And all he did was take it in his adulthood and never got it resolved. So then you inflict your pain on your children. Right? And so I can say, then I become angry. Then it's not dealt with.
Yes.
And that's something physically, but sometimes I had to check myself with my own wife that you could be verbally abusive and not even realize you're doing it.
Yeah.
So that's like the generational cycle of violence. And people go through this generation, and I decided that it had to stop at some point.
When do we break that?
Right, when do you break it?
Yeah.
But you have to be consciously aware of your behavior in order to do that.
Yes.
And what I see is that I see it particularly in walking around just in New York, you see so many mothers yelling and cussing at sons.
Yeah.
And they're angry. And I told her, I said, you're going to create a child that's not going to like women because you're the first woman in his life. And he's going to already be angry at you.
He's going to become a misogynist.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's going to hate women.
Yeah.
Based on the seed you've sown inside that child.
Yes. I know
Can I
that.
chime in on that
Yes,
one?
please.
So the reason why we call it the impotent person becomes the potent person, the key factor is fear. You understand? Once that impotent person was scared of that person screaming, and we have another term that we use. We have two terms. So we have traumatic bonding, where the victim begins to relate with the abuser and becomes like the abuser in order not to get abused anymore. Right?
Like
So
a protective mechanism.
you ever heard of the Stockholm syndrome?
Yes.
Right. And you had the London syndrome, Stockholm syndrome with Patty Hearst, where she became part of the people who was robbed, the abusers.
Yes.
Right? And that's essentially what happens in a relationship. When the abuser comes and he inflicts violence on the family, we naturally develop what we was talking about, survival instincts.
Yes.
Right? And our survival instincts kick in, and we realize that in order to stop the abuse or stop him from abusing me is to begin to relate to him so that we could develop that relationship so that he doesn't abuse me anymore. And then what happens is you begin to take on the persona of the abuser. And once you take on the persona of abuse, you begin to, and you don't get abused anymore, and then you begin to treat the person who you once was affectionate with the same way. And then it begins to take away that emotional response of you feeling sorry for them because now your relationship and your bond is with your abuser. So that's traumatic bonding, or you can call it the Stockholm syndrome.
Yes. And that's what a bully does, right, Tony? That's what a bully does with the kids when they're bullied. They become friends with the bully, rather not to be bullied anymore.
Right. And that's the same thing.
Exactly. That survival mechanism.
Right. Survival mechanism.
Yes. What? Now we all talk about abuse, women being abused, but a lot of times we don't talk about men. Not only men being the ones receiving the abuse. And when I was thinking about this particular segment, I always said in my life, I would never see myself like, how somebody be putting up with that? Because we all say that. How somebody gonna put up with that? Why you don't just leave them? And I remember when I was I was in my 20s, and I was dating someone, and I just thought it was good, and one day, I just fell. Wow! And it shocked me. It shocked me. I then went into survival mechanism, and I didn't want to hurt that person. But I had to
Defend yourself.
defend
To
myself.
protect yourself.
He then got in touch with one of my family members and begged, "Oh, this is a nice person. Go ahead." Went back. Next time I was held by gunpoint and knife point, 24 hours. Didn't have anywhere to go. I was in Baltimore, living in Washington. And I started looking at myself like most people. What did I do? How did I cause this? And I realized that the abuser finds the thing, and in this particular situation it was financial. Find the thing that they can use to control you. Okay? Now, could you talk about what should I say, those signs? Because there's always a sign. To me, there's a sign, because when I sat back and I look at it, I was like, you fool, it was right in front of your face. But you put up with it's okay, you put up with this much and this much. So let's talk about that. Let's
Okay, so for me, right, and so much people talk about this emotion like it's a great thing in a relationship. But the more you delve into it, it's the most destructive thing in a relationship. Yes. And that's jealousy, right? Jealousy doesn't say I love you. Jealousy says I own you, right? And that's the difference between somebody being confident and arrogant. Somebody confident is sure that they do something. Somebody arrogant says I'm better than you, right? And so you have to understand the differences when you look at these things. So a lot of people believe because the person is jealous that I'm talking to somebody means that they're focusing their attention on me and they really love me. But all they're doing is expressing their ownership of you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so now if I take the human aspect out of the relationship and you become a thing instead of a human being, I can hit you, I can call you names and not feel anything for you because you're not a human being. You're a thing I own. All right? So the key point, the key element that 90% of these abusers express is jealousy. That's the number one sign that people overlook as love. That is the forerunner for abuse.
Now, we're talking about, we're going to go into what children see and what they hear and how they emulate it. And that is one of the things I know for myself. You know, there's a thing in the word that says the power of life or death is in the tongue.
Yes.
And I want either one of you guys to speak to that person who has kids, who is in a relationship where they're not getting beat, but the man or the woman is harsh to them. How does that influence the family in general? How does that influence, and what is one of the first steps if they're experiencing and starting seeing these traits in their children? What is a step that someone could do to try and catch it before it gets too far?
What do you say? We'd have to remove them out the environment first.
Well, there's various things you could do. All right, so first of all, there's two things that could happen when somebody is in an abusive, what you're talking about, somebody being in an abusive environment and you have an adult screaming and yelling at them. First of all, there's a word that we use called unworthiness. And we begin to go into the shame factor, right? So when you be going into the shame factor, you feel that you're not good enough for anything. That self-love is totally gone.
Yeah.
All right. So now, in order to catch it, like I don't know if you heard of the test that the Kenneth Clark did with the what you call it, Brown versus Richard education, when he looked at it, Kenneth Clark. So it was a psychologist, and they had the white doll and the black doll.
Oh yes.
and the kids looked at it, and that's part of the psychological training that you give these kids when you do these type of behaviors. They begin not to look at themselves, but they begin to look at somebody else as the role model, and then you got to look and see who they're looking at as the role model, as an alternative to themselves, right? Because that determines the behavior that they're going to take. All right. Just as like when there's a father not in the house, we look at TV, and I look. Well, then in them times it was the Huxtables. That's what I want to be. And you play the music, and that's what you think life is going to be like until you get into that role and you find.
I'm
I actually
it hits you.
As a kid, I actually mentioned, I said, I wish you would like the Hustle, and my family got upset when I said that. They actually lashed out at me because I realized I touched a nerve. You know what I'm saying? But if a kid says something like that, man, that means something, his perception or something is wrong, or what he's experiencing is wrong.
But we have to get our perception from somewhere.
Right, exactly.
We are always, our mind is always looking and it's interpreting. And if we don't have that proper guidance to interpret what we see, we begin to interpret it and take things from different places. Like I ask you a question and I ask you a question. This is how kids grow. So then we put it together ourselves and we get that role. Now, whatever they're processing is what they're going to act out.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that process doesn't always work in the favor of the way we want it to work. You understand? You can't pour in negative and get positive. You know what I'm saying?
True.
You know what I'm saying? And it's just that way. You can't have a positive effect with a negative thought. It's impossible. You know what I'm saying? Like you can't smile. I mean, you once you smile, you know what I'm saying? It's like you change the whole aspect of your attitude.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Your body is not incongruent with your mind. You know what I'm saying? So these things, these principles always stay and always reoccur. So now, because of these principles, we have to understand that when you look at a child in that environment, how do you do an intervention and stuff? You have to begin to talk to the child, and you know, they say there's two things that's the windows to the mind. The eyes is the windows to the mind, and what they express. One way we get children to express what they feel is to have them draw. And they begin to, and you'll see like they'll draw, whatever they draw is whatever they see that's going on in their family. And that's the way to get what's in their mind out. And then when you see whatever they're talking about, then that's when you can address the situation. First of all, you have to find out the symptoms, and that's one way we, as dealing with children, find out the symptoms of what's going on in their mind.
So Jericho Road deals with the whole family.
Yes, you have to deal with the whole
family.
You can't.
Wonderful.
You can't take out one aspect because everything has something to do with the other.
How long is the programs? Do you guys go to program? Is there that you follow the family throughout? Or how do you?
Okay, so here's what we do, right? Just like I'm talking to you, we'll do a segment. So when we call it a DV segment, I don't even go in and speak about the cycle of violence and all of that. I'll do a thing on love, identity, and the self, right? Because I want the message not to only reach the women, but reach the men. You don't want to bash the men, but you want to bring them in with the women to create the cohesive environment. You know, the higher elevation of level is the collective. So that means that we have to come together. So when we bring it together, we can work out the differences between the men and the women. We're not here to bash the men, we're here to uplift the men and uplift the women.
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
This is a joint society. This is not a separated society. Exactly. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Well, with some aspects, I mean, if you look at some domestic violence organizations, they do eliminate the man. They kind of push him to the side. I keep saying, well, why do you do that? I said domestic violence will never get solved unless you deal with him.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I like you guys' approach because it's about self-love and knowing that you are worthy of better.
Right? Yes. Amen.
You are worthy of better. Better is and better is out there for you. you've just got to think better of yourself as well, because a lot of times we stay in situations because we have so much stuff that we need to work on, and we then you have your abuser, the predator, because I tell people all the time, a predator always know the scent of his prey. And so I encourage people when I sit and speak to them that in domestic violence and stuff like that too, it's just like, because you can't, like a lot of people would go into a shelter and they would go in a shelter, go in a program, and then go out. And I tell people, you can't just go out. You need more tools. You need support system, because you're just going out there for the predator to smell you again, and he's going to come back. And if you don't have all the tools that you need to survive, it won't work. So I love what you guys do. And this, there's a pledge that you guys have, which I love, and I think every family, and I'm going to later on read this for you guys, but I think I have enough time. I'm going to try and read it now, but it's called Today. It says, I pledge not to example to them and my community. I will no longer insult or demean anyone. I will learn to forgive and have patience with my loved ones. I promise before God and my community. And this is just awesome. And I think every family, whether they're going through domestic violence or not, should have this. And I am so grateful that you guys took the time out to be here with us today. Would like you to, tell the viewers where we can find you and your website, etc. Just give them some more information on you guys.
The website is www.jerichoroaddv.org. If you want a phone number, it's 718-566-7300. We'll come out to any organization. We'll do presentations. And thank you. Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, we have a website. It's www.jerichoroaddv.org. All right. And we on Facebook and Instagram.
So we are so grateful, like I said, to have these gentlemen with us today. And remember, self-love starts with you. You don't look for anyone else to show you what love is until you learn what love is for yourself. It's so important to tap into that, not only for yourself, but your family. And remember, as I always say, lead with love, because love always wins.
Thank you.
Good.